So every now and then I get a subscriber who sends me some information about Orbital Assembly and their ambitious new plans to build a space station with artificial gravity. Indeed, they are the only company that's aggressively looking to build such a station. Everybody else is looking for a more traditional microgravity station, and for good reasons, because they're looking to take advantage of the industry that one can carry out in microgravity that you can't carry out in an environment that has at least some gravity. So that makes sense, but on the other side of the equation, trying to stay in a microgravity environment for a sustained period of time is an exercise in torture. This company argues quite legitimately that working in orbit for a sustained period of time is going to be simply impossible unless you have some kind of artificial gravity. Bone loss and muscle mass and microgravity is something that we have as yet been unable to reverse. The longer an astronaut stays in orbit, the more difficult it's going to be for him or her when they return to Earth. If you stay for a year or longer, the damage can be very significant. However, I have spoken to astronauts who stay in microgravity for 6 months or so, and even though it is uncomfortable for the few first days, it's something that they are able to overcome if they've been active and energetic and exercising on a regular basis. However, that being the case, I still think that an artificial gravity station makes a hell of a lot of sense. But here's the problem. Orbital Assembly is actually planning to get this station deployed by 2025, and a lot of common people like you and me are investing their own money in a number of different crowdfunding exercises that this company has carried out in order to get this station built. And frankly, there is no damn way that this company is going to be able to get a station, even the Pioneer station that you're looking at right now, which is much more reasonable than some of the more massive stations that they've been talking about in the past. There's simply no way that it's going to happen that quickly, or indeed within the next 10 years or maybe even longer. And unfortunately, NASA agrees with me. Hello YouTube, I'm the Angry Astronaut, and this is Okay, I'm in a generous mood, so let's start with the good stuff. Orbital Assembly, since they've rebranded themselves and also changed some of their leadership, has become a company that is incredible at promoting themselves. As you can see, these guys are catching the attention of just about every high-profile news agency and morning talk show and everything else that you can think of. It is astonishing, simply stunning how much attention this company is getting. Unfortunately, that attention is not coming with investment, but we'll get to that in a little bit. On top of that, I also thoroughly believe in their mission. We absolutely need artificial gravity if we are going to carry out, for example, long-distance journeys throughout the solar system that take years, or if people really want to live in space. This is the only company that's seriously working on that. On top of that, this company's station can also simulate Martian gravity or lunar gravity, for example, because although we have some theories as to what reduced gravity is going to do to the human body over the long term, we really don't know. We're actually just guessing. So before we go to Mars, it can be argued that having a station that simulates Martian gravity would be a good thing to have. And perhaps my favorite thing about this station is their choice for transportation and evacuation. As you can see here, the Dream Chaser is what they have in mind, at least for the vast majority of the services that they intend to provide. There are some other alternatives, as you can see, but in general, Orbital Assembly has supported using Dream Chaser as their primary vehicle of choice for transportation and emergency evacuation. And the reasons for that are obvious. If you have to evacuate 26 people, which by the way is the capacity of their most modest space station, this vessel would be your perfect choice, simply because it can land on any airfield across the planet. You don't have to worry about water recovery, and well, you don't have to rely on Starliner either. So I do believe that they have a very good plan as far as that's concerned, even though Dream Chaser is not going to have a human-rated vessel until 2026. That alone makes the 2025 date very questionable, but really, that's the least of their problems. And I would say the best way to make a comparison as to the viability of this space station is to compare it to the Sierra Space/Blue Origin Orbital Reef plan, which by the way doesn't have 26 people, but rather 6 to 8 in its initial deployment, and can be deployed with only 3 launches. How does Orbital Assembly stack up? Well, before I start getting all critical, first of all, let me encourage everybody to subscribe to Orbital Assembly's YouTube channel. I think it's worth it to keep up with what they're doing because their ideas, at least, are very innovative. Also, subscribe to Sierra Space, as I've encouraged you to do, and subscribe to my channel. I'm still trying to get to 100,000 for the 100K challenge, and if you're wondering what that is, well, that's linked in the description too. So let's get on with it. At first glance, we would think that Orbital Reef is not very ambitious and not planned out very well because it's going to be operating in microgravity, therefore people can't stay here for a sustained period of time without really damaging their health, and also it's not as big as the whole Orbital Assembly plan. It carries, as I said, maybe 6, 8 people in its initial configuration. Orbital Assembly has 26. So yeah, I mean, why did this get so much funding from NASA and Orbital Assembly got virtually nothing? Well, there's some very big factors to consider. First of all, one of the main reasons that you put a space station in orbit is because of microgravity, producing new types of metallic alloys, new types of medical technology, 3D printed organs, virtually all of the cutting-edge technologies that you want to develop in space can only be done in microgravity, which means if you create an artificial gravity station, you're kind of defeating the purpose, unless you have a big central area that's in microgravity, which the Pioneer station doesn't seem to have. Artificial gravity essentially prevents a space station from carrying out some of the most profitable industries that you can do in space, and this includes a number of things that they mention on one of their own press releases: the manufacturing of integrated circuits, photonics, fiber optics, satellite rework, military applications, biomaterials, organ growth, and pharmaceuticals. Even though you can probably do some of those things in reduced gravity, you're really not going to get any better performance unless you're in microgravity. Now, from time to time, they might be able to spin down the station and put everybody into microgravity, but that would require that all of the tenants agree to this ahead of time. You would need to coordinate everybody's work and everybody's experiments at the same time in order to make this practical, and that, I'm sad to say, doesn't sound very likely. It would be a lot more convenient to do your work on a station that's always going to be in microgravity like Orbital Reef. Now, given these drawbacks, there is one practical use for a station like this. You could have it trailing Orbital Reef or any other microgravity station and have a 10-day on, 10-day off work schedule for the people working on Orbital Reef. They could then transfer to the artificial gravity station, thus extending the amount of time that they could stay in orbit. They wouldn't have to be subjected to the rigors of microgravity month after month if they could move to an artificial gravity station a couple of kilometers away every 10 days or so. It would be a difficult schedule, but it would significantly extend the amount of time that people could stay in orbit. But alas, none of the orbital assembly designs can really take advantage of that, and the reason is because this station is designed to operate in a sun-synchronous orbit, where no other space station is ever going to be, or at least it's extremely unlikely. And why are they doing it this way? Well, because of its power requirements. As you can see, there's no real solar panels or radiators, the sort of thing that we traditionally rather see on space stations. And that isn't because it's poorly designed. Actually, its electrical system design is very good, but the modules and virtually everything else are covered in solar panels. That isn't enough to generate sufficient electricity for the station. So, consequently, it has to be in a sun-synchronous orbit. That's between 600 and 800 kilometers up, which is nearly double that of the International Space Station. That puts this entire project in a state of serious jeopardy for a number of reasons. It is significantly more difficult to get heavy payloads up to a sun-synchronous orbit. Even Starship can't get 100 tons all the way up there without refueling, which would increase the price of deploying this thing no matter what heavy launch provider you use. On top of that, you also need to resupply all these people. It's actually a 28-person crew, I apologize for the earlier error, so you have to resupply 28 people plus all the work they're doing all the way up in an orbit that isn't very conducive to these sorts of things. Now, in the future, when we establish a cislunar architecture and we can resupply things from the moon, send various types of materials, water, that sort of thing from the moon, it's going to be just as easy to send it to SSO as it will to LEO. But that's a long time in the future, not 2025. And these problems became painfully obvious when Orbital Assembly made a proposal to NASA for a commercial LEO destination, or CLD. Quote, its significant weaknesses included a lack of understanding of complexities for resupply for the artificial gravity concept and large crew proposed, not addressing space environment challenges with maintaining a CLD in continuous sun-synchronous orbit, a lack of availability of launch facilities to launch crew into a sun-synchronous polar orbit, use of NASA heritage hardware without a declaration of its needs, and claims that its modified life support system will have larger capacity than currently realized. Its proposed long-duration artificial gravity concept for CLD is incompatible with some research, limited CLD development description, a weak risk strategy, and a complex assembly proposal. Its weaknesses included a lack of controllability assessment for its artificial gravity design and an unidentified avionics and command data handling design and risk assessment. That's not good, and NASA gave them a level of confidence rating of red, which is the worst they could have received. Their competitors, in general, did significantly better. Now, NASA had a number of other negative things to say, but I'm not going to pile on here. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about the few strengths that they identified. Quote, a flight demonstration of automated on-orbit assembly of trusses. Its significant strengths included more than 2 crew members at initial operations, modularity to increase flexibility and growth potential for the CLD, a design that provides capacity for large payloads, an artificial gravity proposal that includes external payloads which could benefit future technology development, a maintenance crew for the CLD, and strong emergency response and redundancy emergency planning. So just to be clear, this is not a poorly designed station or some poorly conceived piece of junk that they're using to try to rook people out of their money during these crowdfunding exercises. This is not some kind of scam, as some of my colleagues on YouTube have sort of suggested over the past. Instead, what I think is this is a station that still needs a lot of work. For example, the CTO of this company, Dr. Tom Spilker, is an incredibly experienced engineer who worked for NASA for more than 20 years. He also worked on the Voyager, Cassini, and Genesis missions, along with many other very prominent missions for NASA. So with people like this amongst your staff, you absolutely have something that is viable and genuine, but there are many drawbacks. Probably the most significant drawback with their plan is the timeline. I mean, this thing would make Elon Musk wince. They're talking about testing the gravity ring in orbit by the third quarter of next year. So a little bit more than a year to get their P-Star manufacturing robot, which has proven to be pretty impressive, but ready to go to orbit, and also sufficient materials to build an entire test gravity ring, hopefully in low Earth orbit, because that will be a lot easier, and then the necessary operations and technology to test the thing and to see whether or not artificial gravity is actually going to be a practical thing. And after that, they're going to start constructing their life pods or their habitation pods, whatever you want to call them. And the reason I use the word life pod is because they bear some similarity to what Sierra Space is making, although theirs are a little bit bigger. How they intend to do that, I'm not entirely sure, and how to make it affordable is even more questionable. Remember, Sierra Space has raised $1.4 billion worth of private funding during their first funding round, whereas this company raised roughly a little bit over $2.5 million with their crowdfunding efforts and about $3 million in government incentives when they went to Huntsville. About $5.5 million as opposed to $1.5 billion. And by the way, Sierra Space doesn't think that that $1.5 billion is going to be sufficient to build their station. How much is it really going to take to build something like Pioneer? It's going to have to be in the billions, and I don't see a clear plan on the part of Orbital Assembly to raise anywhere near this much money. If they get some kind of huge whale in the future, somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or something like that, then their chances improve radically. However, given that Jeff is already constructing his own space station, I don't think he's going to be shelling out any cash. Maybe Richard Branson might, maybe even Sierra Space might, given that they were founded by a husband and wife billionaire couple. But right now, they don't have remotely the money to be setting up these kinds of timelines. But here's what pisses me off, and this has nothing to do with Orbital Assembly. They've been selling this timeline to major media organizations all over the planet, and these organizations have just been accepting it without even questioning the technological feasibility of this sort of thing. They are just so uninformed and so ignorant of these matters, and really, that is unacceptable. I mean, for God's sake, we've got people like Neil deGrasse Tyson appearing on these shows talking about this station without being critical of the overall plan and talking about its feasibility and whether or not we're really going to have a space hotel by 2025. Instead, it's all about, hey, guess what, guys? We're going to have a space hotel in 3 years, which is likely to aggravate people as it is to excite people. There's going to be plenty of others who are going to say, oh, great, we've got some other distraction, some other entertainment for the uber rich, whereas we should be spending all that money here on Earth. What they're not talking about is all of the practical and beneficial things that can be done in space, very few of which, by the way, involve artificial gravity. If you like what I have to say, hey, if you enjoy my commentary, and once again, please subscribe to Orbital Assembly, because I think they do have an exciting concept, and I hope they get a whale of a supporter in the future. I just have my doubts. But until they actually do, and we do have a viable artificial gravity solution, which we will need in space at some point in the future, until that becomes a reality, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.